My name is Anne-Marie Purkey Levine, and I have some members of Portland's art community here today to talk a little bit about projects that have the notion of placemaking at their core. And I think placemaking, for good reason, that term has become really fraught in recent years and has come under attack as this movement of actual place taking rather than making. So these groups and projects, I think, are really addressing that and staring that down, dealing with the messiness of public art and public space, and dealing with it in really meaningful and innovative ways. So they are all managing projects that are considering sites not only as geographic and physical locations, but as social and even political spaces. They are considering how the projects can both inform and be informed by their physical and conceptual contexts, and how these contexts might evolve in the future. And finally, and I think most importantly, they're considering a plurality of audiences. Who is the project for? Who will be using the site in the future? And finally, who has been there all along? So first we are going to have the Congress Square team come up and tell us a little bit about their project. We have Bree LaCasse, who's the founding executive director for the Friends of Congress Square. We have Pandora, LaCasse, and Alison, Hildreth, who are chairs of the Congress Square Art Selection Committee, and Caitlin Cameron, who you're all familiar with now as the administrator for the Public Art Committee.
I'm going to start off. My name is Caitlin Cameron. I'm the urban designer for the City of Portland in the planning office, and I'm the program manager or the project manager for the Congress Square redesign, which is the redesign project is not only for Congress Square Park, but the entire intersection. You saw just a moment ago a historic image. Congress Square has existed in the city for quite a long time, though it's evolved, and we're sort of in a place to evolve it once more. So the project encompasses not only the park space that was created in 1981, but also the intersection and the spaces in front of the Hay Building and the museum, with the recognition that it's that there's some issues there, that it's not as accessible as we'd like it to be. It's not really the arts space that it deserves, that this community deserves, especially being in the heart of the Arts District and across from the museum. So, I would say that there are several things that are creative about the placemaking that's happening with this project. One of the things that I think is unique here is that the city has not approached a project like this before in this way. And what I mean by this in this way is it really has turned into a public-private partnership situation. So the city, which for this project includes the planning office, myself, and the parks office, as well as the transportation office, but we also are partnered with Friends of Congress Square Park and the Public Art Committee. And so that's a really, to be so collaborative is pretty unique and new way of doing things for us. But the other thing that has been unique for us is going through a pretty robust visioning process for this space. And so you're seeing here some of the results of that visioning process from 2013. I can't remember. It was a while ago now. That really is informing how we want to remake this space, and it gave us, we developed a vision statement out of that visioning process that we really has been a cornerstone that we keep coming back to as we go through this process. So I'll just I'm going to hand it over to the people who are really doing the creative placemaking with this project, but I'll just add that the other unique thing about this project, the other truly collaborative aspect of this project for us is that the landscape architecture and the public art are being created and developed at the same time, and they're being really heavily reinforced, and informed by the work that Friends of Congress Square Park is doing over the last 3 years. And so I think all of those things together are making the project as successful as it is, and it would not be the project it is without all of those unique things happening.
So I'm going to lean in here, I guess. So what makes a great place? The Friends of Congress Square Park took the data that was generated through the public visioning process, and we set out to raise money and to deliver on the community's needs and aspirations to transform the underutilized and unwelcoming space into a community gathering place. And we started with a very simple premise that people sit where there are places to sit. And lo and behold, it's true. So we bought tables and chairs and umbrellas, and we started organizing events, and people started coming. So our creative placemaking work is based on partnerships and drawing on the strengths of our community. We teamed up with Space Gallery the first year to program events, and then we hired an artist to build the patio and bench. Here are the tables and chairs. We brought in food trucks. Food was one of the #1 activities or amenities that people in the community wanted. We teamed up with VIA to create a branding for all the different types of activities that people can do in the square. We then partnered with Mecca to hire Tessa Green O'Brien to paint the mural. We then established an open call process so that we were inviting members of Portland's talented creative community to give us ideas of what type of programming should be in the space. And we continued to solicit feedback from the community. So we were doing dot boards that first year, asking people the types of public art they want, the types of seating they want. And then the park began to self-program. So this capoeira group was just passing by, stopped in, and started to perform. And we now have Mecca students and other artists who come to the park frequently to create. And then we began to expand our programming into the other seasons with Pandora's sculptural lights. We hired a local artist to create our sign, and then we teamed up with Open Bench Project to come up with a bench design, which is now being used in other public spaces around the country, thanks to our partner, Project for Public Spaces. And let's see, so we strive for a variety of disciplines and to reach a range of audiences. And we are certainly increasing access to the arts by serving or providing free arts to underserved populations. And so from hip hop to Shakespeare to modern dance and swing and salsa and films, we have something for everyone. In our first 3 seasons, we have presented over 300 events and activities engaging an estimated 25,000 visitors. And the park, because of all this increased activity, the park has become more welcoming, and it has become a daily destination for people to read and work and chat and meet with friends and people watch and play. And so given this high level of community engagement, we knew that when we started the redesign process, we really needed to create a different model, like Caitlin said, and it really needed to be an inclusive process. So the project team selected a design firm who spoke of the end user as their client and who had a robust public process. So we held 3 public meetings and additional stakeholder meetings over the last 6 months during just the initial schematic concept design phase. And we are now entering the next phase, which is design development. So this is the aerial view of the intersection as it exists today without the amenities. And then this is the proposed redesign. And I will now hand it over to Pandora and Woolley to talk about the art piece.
The Arts Committee decided that this particular project was an opportunity for us to. It was a rare opportunity for the art and landscape designer to work together from the beginning. So that was a major component of the project for us, and we set up a schedule so that the process was that the selection committee for the design team was at the same time as the selection committee for the arts, for the artist. And we put that together and we came out so that we felt that our goal was to have the art and landscape design integrated into the whole space. And that while they will be distinct, one of our criteria was that the art was a focal point. It had strength, and it was a focal point that drew you into the park, because the park is the heart of the arts district. That we wanted a sort of an iconic piece that people could relate to and see as they came in. But we also wanted it to speak to the landscape. We wanted the landscape to speak to the art. So that was our goal in establishing this kind of process. And we're very excited about the way it's come together, and we have chosen the artist, and the design team has been selected. And Willie's going to talk a little bit about that process.
Okay, I'm going to gallop. So we had 4 finalists who presented at the Portland Museum of Art, and we saw Jo Searcy, who is a fabulous artist, we think. She was very enthusiastic about working with the community, and also we chose her on the strength of her past work, which is impressive. And because her work is very site-specific, and some examples, and I have to do a little disclaimer because I'm going to talk briefly about the High Line, but I don't have there's not a slide of it up there. But anyway, one of the Second Avenue subway in New York is just a very, very successful piece. And as you descend, you become absolutely enveloped in that, that what she describes as a design for landscape. I don't know, that title doesn't make so much sense, but anyway, you get this sense of an environment which imparts a sense of accelerating movement through the space and time, much as a speeding train does. So she has the whole loading platform is just these papers that are flying through the air, and she has done the whole space as opposed to the other artists that do subway entrances on that same subway who do individual spots. And then the High Line is a very, very different piece, and that's closer to what she'll be thinking about for Congress Square. She was interested in the fact that it was an abandoned site and a natural habitat for birds and insects and butterflies. So she went to Cornell Ornithological Lab and she did research to see what kinds of birds might inhabit the space, and she's inserted feeding stations in the structure itself, which is really a structure of steel poles, very much like the artist who did the piece that we saw before, which was very beautiful. She creates a negative space within this so that she builds structures on either side, and you're in the negative section. She's very interested in the amount of time people are going to stop and watch the birds and also look at the art, because that is always an issue. How long do people look at art? So for Congress Square, her initial concept is 2 fractured orbs that you will be walking through, and they will form a space which acts as a space that you're enveloped in, but also as a gateway into the park. And the sculpture on the left is going to be larger, and that will be the anchor which identifies the park, and we'll be able to see it from the street. Let's see, and then there's another work further on, and that creates this kind of sense of discovery as you're in the park. And so she's also, as she did with the High Line, working with the botanist who at WRT, the landscapers, because she's very interested in how the piece is going to settle in with the flora and fauna in the park.
So when you, and I'm sorry, these are all the park and not the whole intersection, but when you look at the park just 3 years ago, it's not really surprising that no one went there. There was nothing to do and nowhere to sit. And so just by adding some colorful amenities and some events, it has become a community gathering place. And we are using all of the data that we're collecting so that as we do the design and the art piece, we are making sure going forward that community use remains and the desired qualities of this space remain at the core of the new design. We hope.
Where will the 3 pieces of the sculpture be located?
Where there's orange.
I see, okay. All right.
And this one over here is the one that will have the
Great.
iconic anchoring sculpture.
I promise we'll have time for more questions at the end. So next up, we have Andrew Eschelbacher, Associate Curator of European Art at the PMA, to talk about their new sculpture garden.
Well, thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you, Bonnie, for organizing this and for including the PMA as part of this conference. At the museum, many of you have probably walked on High Street and seen the construction going on in the garden, in the Joan B. Burns garden. And it really poses an interesting question about placemaking in public art, because it's art that's visually very accessible. The 3 sculptures that are in there, you have a clear line to them, they exist in our space, but it's still a private space in a museum setting. And so it exists in this sort of liminal space between public and private. We enjoy it, we all have access to it visually, but we've never had access to it spatially. So we're in the midst of creating a barrier-free sculpture park on High Street. And by barrier-free, I mean that it will be an unticketed space, and it will be universally accessible. It's being regraded, repaved, so that it's accessible for wheelchairs, it's accessible for strollers, and it will be open. It will be open museum hours between May and December. And so it changes from this place that most of us experience like this, behind the wall, where you have this great fence that's beautiful to look at and you get to see the sculptures. And very few of us actually get to walk around in it. And I'm not sure how many of you have had the opportunity to walk around in the space. So it's a beautiful garden that was created to link the 3 individual buildings of the Portland Museum of Art, the McClellan House, the Sweat Memorial Galleries, and then the Payson building, which you see at the top right, which was built in 1983, or finished in 1983. And so the garden was meant to link these 3 spaces, but it then became a really closed space. And primarily, it was used for functions. I'm not sure why that slide's so pixelated, but it was used for functions in the sense that you had to be invited in. And that was great for certain functions, but it also is not the most accessible space. And when the museum committed about 3 or 4 years ago to reinstalling the collection, what we called the Your Museum Reimagined program, the biggest part of it was accessibility. And it was about putting our collection online, putting more art out, making a collection catalog and a study room. And this project, the David E. Shaw and Family Sculpture Park, adds to that by making the garden space accessible, by giving access to what will be 4 sculptures. 4 sculptures in here. There are all 4 of them. You have a work by Jonathan Bisbee, Celeste Robert, Anthony Caro, and then this month we'll be installing a work by Jonathan Borofsky. And that will go, as you can see, right here. So I was walking around the museum last night on First Friday, and we're free on Fridays after 4 o'clock, and I think that we had over 1,100 people come into the museum after 4 o'clock yesterday. So as soon as we were free, people came in. This is an opportunity, and we have a high ticket price, but that's how we have to go about, that's how we're able to do what we do. But this allows us to share the art in a way that there is no barrier, whether it's a physical barrier to getting into the space and no economic barrier to getting in here. And so you get these, works by Anthony Caro or Jonathan Borofsky or John Bisbee or Celeste Roberge, you get to just go and sit and see. And it will also change the way that you experience the city. And this is the before shot. In a month you can see the after. But if you see this orange space right here, this is where the pedestal for the Jonathan Borofsky sculpture will be. And it's actually, the pedestal is poured. You can go check it out now. It's just this round disc that I think people are confused what it is. But, so that's there. And the reason we chose that space for it was because you'll see it from High Street, obviously. You'll see it from Spring Street as you're coming up Spring Street, and you actually see it from Congress Street as well, as far down as the State Theater, because we're installing a 12-foot tall, multicolored sculpture there that's intended to draw you into the space. And it's also, you can see the hole in the fence right here where the gate will be. So it's welcoming you into the space, into this gate, which will be open. You don't have to push it open, it will be open. There's an open invitation to come in at all times. And that was really important. And having Jonathan's sculpture there, I'll come back to those in a minute, but having Jonathan's sculpture there was really significant, because what this sculpture is, human structures, 24 figures connected, is, as much as it's about the art and the beauty of it, the concept of this piece is really significant, and significant to what we're trying to do. When Jonathan talks about this artwork, he talks about the idea of it's these figures. You can't tell anything about them. You can't tell if they're male or female. You can't tell anything. They're just sort of human forms, and they're universal in that sense. And they're connected hand to hand and head to foot. And it's a very architectural sculpture, but he thinks of it in terms of the social architecture, of humanity coming together to build itself, is what he talks about. And we hope that by opening the sculpture park, that we can add to that sense of creating a new space for people to come together, a new space for people to come and see art and to sit. We're ordering benches and trash cans so that you can come and sit and eat your lunch in the park, as long as you throw your trash out. And more things to get people together and into these spaces. So in addition to that, we're very conscious about these patios at the front and the back end of the park where people can gather. Where if we have events there, there's a place to go, and it makes people move through the space in new and interesting ways. And I think that this is obviously not the most elegant picture of bricks on a rainy day, but moving from that aggregate surface to a brick surface to facilitate those paths. And the paths have been regraded so that it's a little bit easier to go on. And so we're really trying to combine the accessibility, the beauty, and the sense of welcoming that people should come and enjoy, and combine it with what we try to do as an institution, which is share the best possible art that we can with the most possible people.
Next up is Soren deNiord, a landscape architect and designer, who will be telling us about a collaborative project that he did with the Telling Room.
As a landscape architect, we taught to think on sort of break the word landscape down, landscape architecture, into sort of its phonetics, and land meaning sort of regional thinking and large scale, scape and more of the streetscape, and then and this project is in East Bayside, and then the architecture and how constantly mediating these different scales. And I was asked to join this project, which was a redevelopment of an old tire warehouse, sort of mechanical yard, and an East Bayside, which is, it's a changing neighborhood with a lot of interesting aspects, and this was an unusual project because there's really not a lot of landscape to consider as far as vegetation or site elements. So we were challenged with this idea of how do you create an interesting privacy enclosure to this parking court. And the neighborhood is really a rich mix of different populations, and it's, I think, a really changing spot that we wanted to anchor this sense of place. And so as a landscape architect, I felt I was grasping a little bit, but we were working with the planning staff and neighborhood association to think about ways to root this building and maybe create an artifact that is representative of this building's time and place. And so the screen is something that I latched onto as it could easily just have been a stockade fence or chain link fence to keep enclosure, but it's a pretty interesting scale of building because people are driving by at a pretty fast rate between Whole Foods or up the street up to Fox Street. And so I was considering the pace in which you would experience this screen. There's going to be a restaurant. There's actually a pretty great restaurant on the corner now. And these are renderings that we were presenting to the neighborhood and to the planning staff. And so I was struggling, grasping at what is this thing? What are these precedents? How do you link it? Use a no-lead plan to it felt a little didactic or, just really sort of obvious. And I kept on thinking, how can we get community input to make this interesting and relevant to the time and place that we're dealing with? And so I just spoken with a writer friend from Portland. I was thinking maybe there's an opportunity to embed text or language, that since Portland's such a rich history of writers. And I just learned about this anthology with the Telling Room. So I reached out to the executive director of the Telling Room at the time, Heather Davis, and she told me about this great anthology they had just published with authors and people living in the neighborhood, particularly a lot of immigrant and refugee writers. So this sort of resonated with me, and I was thinking what Anne Marie was talking about was, how do you give a sense of place on people's reflections of their own place? And actually what we ended up doing was wanting to create an artifact using a very durable kind of gritty material. These are slides from another project, but thinking about the phenomenon and the light and the texture and the shadow, and we were like, steel was a great, really durable material. So we were like looking at different ways that we could bring language to the screen as an object, something you could drive by and not even really realize it, or these little pauses and meditations. And so reading through the anthology, we were sort of, we were drawn to this idea that people's reflections of their home place away from here was almost as powerful as writing about the place itself. So these are some of the earlier studies that we were exploring. Again, just more abstraction than design, things that I felt that, and with Caitlin's help to push me away from, and think that, it's great having feedback. And so we were just, again, looking at a lot of different iterations, and these are the graphics that we'd take to the city and get pushed back. And then so almost wanted to feel like the text was lifted off of the page. Didn't want to really spend too much time with the font or but we did consult with the poet laureate of Portland, Gibson Fay LeBlanc, who helped us select. He was intimately involved with the anthology and helped select the text and highlight these different aspects of the text that I thought would give pop and a little graphical interest. And so each author got 2 stanzas, 2 panels that were cut in 5x8 Corten steel and set up on this wall. And you can just walk right past them, or you can, if you live in the neighborhood, you can pause and read them. And they're really little beautiful excerpts about people's sense of home somewhere else, and now they're here. And this is obviously a changing neighborhood with a lot of probably future changes as well. So this is an artifact that we just wanted to integrate into a very sort of common, it's not a common building, but it's a mixed use market rate housing rental building with a lot of visibility. So it was, as a landscape architect, I'm constantly trying to make the work that we do relevant, and luckily the developer, Redfern Development, was really eager and ran with this idea. So that was the construction, just sort of drawing to get it priced out. We worked with the local fabricator, got a water jet steel cut, And then it has these interesting light qualities. That's the sample panel before it got installed. It has a sort of gauge that allows it to read and the shadow to read and become more of an object as well. So, and it catches snow and shadow and light, and it's also directly adjacent to this other great public mural that's on the backside of the and you can see in context, and so it's part of everyday experience for the residents of the tenants of the structure. And I haven't it just was installed this winter, so it hasn't really been photographed very well yet. These are just iPhone photos. Changing qualities through the season, so if you happen down that way, go ahead. That's that.
Okay, we have one more presenter of the Artist Rapid Response Team. And then we're going to have a bit of a discussion with the panelists, and we'll open it for Q&A with the audience at the end. So we have Anita Clearfield and Jeffrey Layton to tell us a little bit about what they're doing with public art as a form of activism.
There's one sheet out there that has some background information on the UMVA, the Union of Maine Visual Artists, and art, and LumenArt, because there's all these acronyms, and we only have 8 minutes, so I can't go into too much detail on each one, but we're a project of the Union of Maine Visual Artists, and ART stands for the Artist Rapid Response Team. And over the years, we've done over 200 banners for different nonprofits throughout the state, different causes from environmental to healthcare to immigration reform. This is a picture in City Hall recently where we put several of the banners in City Hall. This is at the State House where several of the banners were there for one of the opening days of the legislature. And one of the things we try to do, like that money out of politics one, is use a sense of humor in our work. This was in the climate change rally in Boston. This is on the work shed at Kennedy for cultivating gardens, which have a whole garden downtown there in Portland. And I tried to pick some things that deal with the banners in different spaces, so it's not always just people carrying them at rallies, but they kind of activate different spaces. This is some people getting arrested under a banner where they're at Bath Iron Works protesting that. This was in a parade in Whitefield where we were doing a kind of a surveillance theme, and you have the woman in the shower and the eyeballs. For a while we thought, well, we should arrive on the scene with flashing lights and suits and berets and say, Artist Rapid Response Team, and pull up in an ambulance or something. You need help, we're here. So we tried that for a while, this Purkey at the State House, but we've kind of we give the things to other groups to use. And in this case, we did a little online stuff where we thought about when the whole controversy over immigration came out of LaPage's mouth, and we thought about putting a banner down there under the sign, but we knew they'd take it down, so we pretty much online just put this out there, and it got a lot of interest with the buoys that were showing the flags of some of the different countries where immigrants are from, and that turned into a whole buoy project that was installed at the airport and at USM and in front of the Historical Society. And where Natasha Mayers, who's the person who started ART, did a lot of work in the schools. And this is just one of my favorite images because this Poland Spring alternative water guy was marching in the Casco Bay Parade, which was sponsored by Nestle. There you go. And now Jeff will take over about LumenArt.
Well, building on that idea of that, of doing work for nonprofit groups, what we wanted to do was do something on a much larger scale that would interact with the architecture in Portland and other cities. And so we came up and got a grant to purchase a projector and some ancillary equipment and mapping program and stuff. And so what we were able to do is work with nonprofit groups to create a specific projection that would happen at First Friday or some other time when there's actually people walking around. And this was something that would allow those, that kind of activist work to get up on a much bigger stage. And it's exciting to me because billboards aren't allowed in Maine. And so it's not often you see something big like this on a building, and everybody's looking at their phone all the time. This is big. They get up on the side of the building and it's huge. So we'll show you some of these.
We did this as a video, but we'll talk over it. Yeah.
So this was for 350 Maine, and it's about the Gulf of Maine warming. And this was projected on Mechanics Hall. And we got the leftist marching band to come up. And what you'll see a little of is we used part of the architecture of the building to add to the interaction. And as a matter of fact, what you'll see is we had a polar bear that is there, and then we also had a polar bear that interacted with it in real life. So there was, the kids really went crazy over this. So there's a polar bear in real life.
Yeah, because part of it is like making it an event. So this was on the public library, where again we're mapping, we're using some of the architecture of the library. These are After Effects animations. This one was about immigration and being just welcoming to Maine idea. So in addition though to the animation that's going on in the library that's giving facts about how New Mainers contribute to the Maine economy, in the actual monument square we had projections on the monument itself and on these two 15-foot tall transformant shapes on either side of the monument. So what it did is it monumentalized the immigrants and their story and made them very much a part of some traditional fabric of the city. So it kind of transformed that square, and we had audio so they could tell their stories.
And we worked with the Equality Maine Resource Center that opened up just right down in the center of Portland. And there were 7 groups that we did animations for, and we had interviews with people projected on the transformant shape, and this was a way of introducing people to those 7 groups.
Yeah, and then this was on Martin Luther King Day, where the NAACP has an event at the Holiday Inn, and so we projected on the side of the Holiday Inn, and we only had about 2 weeks for this, so we actually took existing banners, like this was a banner, and Jeff animated it just to give it some life. Same with this one, and then we intercut that with like slogans from King and different people. But you can see it all the way down to the Old Port. It just kind of enlivened the whole, activated the Holiday Inn, and actually the Holiday Inn loved it. They were very excited to have us do it, and it was a nice white building sitting there ready to use.
And this, we had a really big extravaganza planned for Congress Square, and it rained. And one of the things is projections you can't do when it's raining at all. So these were 2 big transformant shapes that were in the middle of the park, and then it had 2 interactive pieces going back and forth, and it's all built around the What's Your Breathable Number, which is a website that you can look and see what the air quality is in your zip code. So,
yeah, and okay, so to take a breath. With when we say transform it, there's a company that does these fabric shapes that are for architectural uses, like restaurants or conferences and stuff, and it's fabric stretched over aluminum poles that can be moved around. So the woman, Cindy Thompson, who owns that company, is in Luminart, and so we've been using some of her shapes, like those ones in Monument Square, or these new ones for the air story one about air quality and climate change. We've been using these big cubes. And what's good about that is we are not dependent on the architecture as much. but it still gives you this kind of surprising thing, because I was walking by the square yesterday and there wasn't anything there, and now, whoa, what's that? You know, so it's that kind of way to still create surprise and excitement in the location. On the last one, we were working with Paul Majewski, the professor up at University of Maine Climate Change Institute, where they had this website that is called 10green.org, and you go on there and you put in your zip code and you find out the air quality in your town or in your zip code. And then what we wanted to do is to create an interactive thing. So we were actually projecting on a surface with another projector the Twitter feed, if people would go to the hashtag what's your breathable number, and they could interact with like what their town was and what they thought about it. And we could encourage people to do something about their air quality, because we're kind of trying to think of ways to interact with the audience more. And another thing we've been doing is Tag Tools, which is a software where you can actually draw live with a projection, so we can do live graffiti on a building, or just, you know, interact with people like, hey, you in the blue shirt, you know, or something. Pay attention, you know, whatever, and just do that. And teenagers love it, though they mostly do hearts and flowers and stuff. But, you know, you can show them quickly how to use it, and they can start drawing things. So it's a kind of way to get the audience involved with that big projection live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just picking up on audience, I know that's something that, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to assemble you all here, because that's central to your projects. So if some of you could talk about how the use of the space by, I guess this would be more relevant for the projects that have been in existence for longer than a month, how the use of the space has changed the original intent of your project, whether it's changed it for the positive, you know, for the better or worse.
Well, when we first started the redesign, one of the desired qualities was accessibility, and Congress Square, as you all may know, is sunken down and there's steps, and so we talked a lot about removing those steps and making the square level, all one space. And at that point, no one was using the square, so it just was obvious to us that the stairs were part of the reason people weren't using the space, that no one could get in there. And then we started using it, and we put in tables and chairs, and people were going in there and working or reading or creating, or the events were happening. We realized that that sunken nature of the plaza area actually makes people feel really safe in the space, that the cars on High Street zoom by, and there's this big planter, which we also thought was a barrier to entry. And so one of the challenges that we've had in working with the redesign is how we make the space more accessible, but also continue to have that quality of sort of you're in a safe space once you get in there. And so it's been a real challenge. The redesign does take out most of the stairs, and it has more gradual ramps, and we're hoping that the planting islands provide that, and the horticulture provide the same sense of security once you get into this space. But we won't know until it's built. But so using the space made us think differently, certainly, about the design.
Were there any conflicts for you, Bree, or for any of the other projects when thinking about past, present, and future audiences? Were there conflicts between those groups, and how did you resolve them? Or did you resolve them?
One of the things that we thought a lot about at the museum, and this is, as I sort of alluded to at the beginning, of that liminal nature of the space, of the public-private relationship to it, and thinking about the way that we install sculpture there, and the way that we have a responsibility to care for the sculpture and to steward the sculpture, and for better or for worse, not for better, for worse. You know, outdoor sculpture is impacted by community vandalism on occasion. It happens to our 7, it happens all around. So we really had to think about that, but that was a concern, but the overwhelming positive of opening the park and making it accessible and making it part of the community was really important to us. And as we thought about that, and sort of as we watched what happened with the 7, and I think that we see throughout public art in Portland, is when it's a community project, when the community's involved, there's community buy-in and community support for it. And that's one of the best defenses against this vandalism. I remember when the Portland police put out, someone drew something on the 7 and the Portland police put it on Facebook, and the number of times it was shared because there was just general, not just museum upset about the sculpture, but community outrage about it. And so it's that community buy-in and the way of creating spaces like Congress Square or Sculpture Park or whatever it may be, was overwhelming in thinking about that, those conflicts, those internal tensions about what it is that we do, because it's idealistic, but everything has a certain amount of risk to it.
To respond to the idea of the 7, I think the Arts Committee too has been looking at that. You know, we've been looking at the material, you know, and what kinds of materials. You know, so we're in our process. We think about that, you know, the durability and the maintenance of it, and we also think about the interaction. So the interaction of the piece, and are people going to go up? Are they going to touch it? Do we want them to touch it? And for us, you know, the interaction is very important because it's a public square. So you know, all those kinds of things are considered, and the safety. If people do climb on it, what are the ramifications? So all those kinds of things are, you know, we consider and we are considering, you know, with this new acquisition, and.
Well, just to add to that, in terms of interaction, part of Sarah's piece on the highlight, people did start coming up and putting bird feed in the feeders, so, and that was just exactly what she wanted, and I think that, but I think the safety concern is always something.
Soren, could you talk a little bit about the concept of a neighborhood and how, like, conceptually neighborhood went into the concept of the project?
Sure. Well, the design process with getting a building permitted is a lot of community engagement and neighborhood association meetings. So right from the beginning, we presented the idea that we wanted feedback from the neighborhood on what the potential for this space could be. And there weren't a lot of ideas that came forward directly as viable that met the sort of building's practical enclosure requirements. And I mean, this is sort of just a common element that we wanted to transform. But we did, as soon as we sort of latched onto the idea of the text piece, people were pretty enthusiastic and embraced it. And that being said, it's it's a really diverse neighborhood, and a lot of the authors were from the Kennedy Park neighborhood, but some have already left the city and places, so it's a bit transient and that way. But I think the overall response from people that I've heard of really enjoying it and engaging with it, and then even people that just drive by are like, oh yeah, I drive by that every day. So it's like it somehow beautifies their commute or even just waiting in line for a restaurant, or people that live in the building have commented on just sort of the changing qualities and throughout the season. So it's it was rewarding to hear all that feedback. But it's a fence, and it's like, and but it's, yeah, and so there's that too. So it's it has a utility aspect to it, but I trying to make it relevant was what I think people were excited about, and that's so far that's what we've heard.
And Anita and Jeffrey, I thought you guys could touch on, if you don't mind, when you're choosing your sites, are you looking for what makes a blank canvas, or are you also thinking, I mean, I'm sure you are thinking about what the site is and the purpose it serves and the message that you're projecting onto it? Can you talk a little bit more about those decisions, like how you make those decisions?
Well, it's all of the above, really, because the projection works best, obviously, on a lighter colored surface, but also we want architectural features that we can build whatever the content is around. And one of the things that we really want to make clear is this distinction between showing a movie on the side of a building and having a projection that's mapped to the specific architectural details. And so we do really try to find a building that is interesting, has some historical or community relevance, and is also, unfortunately in Maine, it's very hard to find, not a red brick building. So those, we do spend a lot of time, and we also need to have a place that we can have a projector in a safe place, and so all those things work into it.
Yeah, and in addition, just in Maine, where enough people are gathered, if you think about who's going to see it, like there's a lot of great white buildings around, or like I've got some barns in mind, but you know, no one's going to see it except a few cows, you know, so you got to go, okay. And getting enough people out at night, I mean, we were talking about this in one of the other groups, like, or I think Pigeon mentioned it, I mean, people don't gather in public places here, and so, you know, we got to do First Friday, we've got to do a time when there will be people around who will see it, and it has to be after dark, which in the summer is late, you know, like we ran into in Congress Square that their ordinance shuts them down at 8 o'clock pretty much for sound. And so, you know, it was like, okay, so we would do a silent thing, there wouldn't be a band, you know, and so, and then also in winter, it's so cold when it gets dark, so it's, oh my God. So yeah, it's not the ideal place, you know, those dirty people down in New York and DC. But if we try hard.
If you've seen the projection that was done down in DC on the Trump Hotel, where they put a pointer that says "Bribes here," that projection was only up for 5 minutes.
Before the security came out and shut them down. Yeah.
But because it was documented and shared on Facebook, it had a much greater life. And so we spend a lot of time doing these little mini documentaries about each one of the projects. And we post that because we know we're only going to be seen by 100 or 200 people. But by showing it on Facebook or Vimeo or one of those places, we're able to reach a much bigger audience.
Yeah, and I think it calls into question about what is public space now. You know, because I think in a country especially that is so caught up with private property and, you know, what's allowed and not allowed in terms of hurting buildings. I mean, this is good, at least we're not, you know, it's ephemeral, it won't damage the building, but we have always gone for permits so far. But even if we do guerrilla things, that the public space really becomes that virtual one in some ways rather than the gathered one.
Great, well, I want to make sure we have time for audience questions, so open it up.
I have just kind of maybe a little bit technical question. The sculpture garden of the PMA, one of the frustrations, as you've said, is like you can't access it. You can see it, but you can't get to it. Is with the public entrance from High Street into the sculpture garden, is there going to be any continuation into the museum or coming out of the museum into that space, or is it still going to be kind of like a separate entity?
It will be a separate entity. Whether that changes down the road, I think in an ideal world we'd love to see that change down the road. But for the time being, it will be a separate entity. There is a door there, but it's an emergency exit. We have to keep it closed for climatological reasons. For the art that's in the building. It's an emergency exit, but it's really a discrete space for people to come and have a taste of the museum and a taste of lunch. And I've been working on that one. and then to, you know, it's unfortunate, but maybe, hopefully down the road.
And in that sense of collaboration, is there any reaching out towards Congress Square Park? Like, is there anything talking between the two spaces that's going to encourage people to wander down a little out of the park or out of the square and stuff like that to connect it all?
We haven't been, I would say we haven't been super collaborative about it, although I think that both projects are aware of each other, and you know, I think especially in the thought that went into the placement of the Borofsky and really considering how that's viewed from different approaches. Similarly, with Congress Square redesign, we consider how that space is approached from all different parts of the city as well, especially, you know, when you come, it's a high point on Congress Street and there's a sense of arrival from a lot of directions, including coming up High Street. So I think it's mostly at this point a collaboration of more just how sightlines are happening and what you're seeing from different sightlines. The other challenge we have with High Street is that it's a state road, and so there's some limitations to how much we can change what's happening there, but we also want with some of the landscape redesign to have the landscape also bring some branding and sense of arrival that you, so there's a little bit, but I would say it's not a real strong collaboration.
There's been a lot of discussion about changing State and High Street into each into two ways. And how does that relate to the rethinking of that area?
Sure. The way that we've approached that, the question was about the proposal to convert State and High streets back to two-way streets as they once were. The way that we're approaching that with the redesign project is that we are moving curbs and reconfiguring the street in a way that if High Street were to become two-way, it would be relatively simple to do. And we also, in designing the landscape elements, we want them, we don't want to have to redesign them twice. So right now when we're designing, we haven't quite gotten to that level of detail yet, but the plan is that as we continue to develop the designs, the actual placement of planters and landscape elements will be set back far enough that if we do have to modify curbs for two-way conversion, we won't really be messing with the main design elements of the space. It really would just be about moving curbs if we have to do that.
Yeah. Is there any potential for rotating sculpture in the new park down the road?
There's a potential for a lot of different things down the road. We have a sort of program for the next several years about what we'll do in terms of installing sculptures like the Borofsky and I think a few more on the horizon. But it's certainly something that we've talked about and something that we continue to talk about.
I'm wondering to the point of how people don't gather outside in Maine. In summertime, we do. It's just not in public spaces. And I'm wondering how much of that is because things are so poorly lit in our public spaces after dark. So Congress Square, as gorgeous as it is, the lights up, is not friendly after the sun goes down that I would bring a book and a cup of coffee and have some friends and play a game of chess. Tommy's Park does have activity in it, but it still doesn't feel like a gathering spot. It feels like a hangout spot. So is there any sense of improving lighting to encourage more interaction after dark? Because I can tell you, as soon as the sun goes down, the patios of every bar in the city are thriving with people. And it's not all people who are there just to drink, they're there to socialize.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll just comment.
Congress Square, yes.
I'll just comment briefly on that. When we in the vision statement and as we've worked on the project, we have really tasked the design team and the artists to think about how the space works at all times of day and all seasons. It is a challenge, but as the city and I would hope also in private spaces as there is work done and improvements are made, that I think there is more attention paid now to those kinds of things. So I think it will incrementally improve as projects. It'll be sort of piecemeal as projects happen.
Can you all talk a little bit about designing, selecting, like working through committees? So for example, Congress for a Park has a committee a team of people, Tempo, like there's teams and committees involved in every single one of your projects. So I was wondering if you could talk about the challenges and the opportunities of that. So there's a landscape architect who works with developers, like the idea of people coming together to make decision is obvious here.
Yeah, well, just real quickly, because I also wanted to put out if artists are interested in joining either art or lumen art, we're always looking for people to collaborate with. So in terms of our internal collaboration, that's a huge part of our process where we design things together and we change roles, and it's a chance to learn a part of the system that you might not have done. But then, yeah, somebody else wants to jump in more on the outside world.
Well, the art committee put together an actually separate panel. It was this artist selection panel. We had 9 members, and the 9 members were constituted the community around Congress Square, and that's dictated in our guidelines that and each project that's looked at in the public realm, that you put together a panel of stakeholders in that area. So that's how we get it done.
And we have, so Friends of Congress Square Park is a 501c3, so we have a board of directors, and then and we try to have representation, and we have representation from the neighborhood. What we're working on now is getting representation from the business communities, so it is always a process of making sure that the neighborhood is represented. In Congress Square is our most densely populated and income and ethnically diverse neighborhood in the city, and it also has the cultural institutions and the educational institutions, so always striving to have representation. And then we have committees, so we let people self-select what they're interested in. So we have an operations committee that paints our benches and helps with tables and locking up tables and chairs and cleaning, and we have a gardening committee, which we need more space to garden because that's the most popular committee. People seem to really want to garden. So they are, have weeding meetups, and they water, and then we have an audience engagement committee, and that's the committee that works on selecting the lineup of events for the season. So it is always a challenge. We are working right now on a couple different events, a Try Your Hand calligraphy event that we did last year that had 15 different people speaking 15 different languages who live in the neighborhood who were there for the day, teaching people how to write in their language. And we're working on organizing a immigrant fashion show right now. And we've been struggling and trying to figure out how to bring new people onto the committee who can help reach those communities. So it's always a challenge, but a worthwhile one.
Yeah, I'll just conclude that, anytime you have a committee or a collaboration, it adds time, obviously. You just have to, it comes with the territory, you just have to be aware of that. But I think ultimately, artists sometimes complain about design by committee, or artists and designers complain about design by committee, art by committee. I think it's really important to carefully select your committee members and make sure that you are thinking about, is it stakeholders that represent different groups or different skill sets? How do you put that committee together, and what are you trying to get from it is really important. And then, of course, having a vision statement or strong goals and criteria to keep that you can return to and say, what are we trying to accomplish? Because whenever you have a group setting, a committee setting, it's just more, it can be more unwieldy. So you just have to have some of those management and systems in place to keep everyone sort of in the same direction.
And sometimes it can take years.
Yeah. Yeah. But ultimately that's the way a lot of stuff is going. I mean, every project here has a collaborative or community or collaborative or committee aspect to it, and it really gets you a better product at the end of the day.
Thanks, everybody.